गुड मॉर्निंग लेडीज एंड जेंटलमैन, सुप्रभात। आशा करता हूं कि आपकी कल की संध्या मंगलमय रही हो और आज का प्रभात, आज की सुबह भी मंगलमय और आनंदमय रही। Ladies and gentlemen, welcome you. I hope you had a blissful evening yesterday and you've started this morning with on a very, very blissful note. The great poet Robert Frost said, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." Whether it's the current times or any times, whether it's winters or summers, we all have miles to go before we sleep and miles to go before we sleep. Warm welcome with wishes of health, happiness, and peace to the NIIT India Conference 2021, Accelerating Performance Through Transformative Learning. In line with our theme, yesterday we understood the importance of the role of corporate academies in building skills and accelerating performance, along with two successful examples of Randstad's Skills Academy and Axis Bank NIIT Academy of Relationship and Wealth Management. We also got insights into learning principles from ancient civilizations. Then, of course, the power panel of 6 CXOs who shared with us their perspective about seeing the current pandemic situation as an opportunity. We concluded the day with a global case study on the role of technology in accelerating time to competence and productivity, and of course, by felicitating our distinguished alumni. Before we proceed, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to share some important information. Please use the event hashtag NIIT India Conference 2021 while sharing on social media. Click on leaderboard to win exciting Amazon vouchers. Record feedback in the testimonial section. For any assistance or to connect with a business representative, please visit the reception, selfie booth, and fast car video games during session break. Please visit the exhibit booth to know more about NIIT. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear leaders, the Leaderboard Awards will be announced post-lunch. Some very, very exciting awards. And now, may I share, NIIT in partnership with Josh Bersin Academy conducted a global research on adaptive learning organizations. It's my pleasure to introduce Pooja Singh Mehta, Head of Consulting and Advisory Services, NIIT, and Josh Bersin, founder, Josh Bersin Academy, and leading HR and learning research analyst. Pooja will share highlights from the research, followed by Josh's power session, where he'll share how the macro trends in learning and the way people work require learning organizations to be more adaptive, and exceptional research about the role of adaptive learning in accelerating performance. Over to you, Pooja and Josh.
Thank you so much, Dilip. And I'm going to try and share my screen. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the summit. We released this research on adaptive learning organizations in the US and Europe late last year. And today I'm going to be introducing you to some of the highlights from the report. And I hope you've had an opportunity to download the report. If not, the link will be available at the end of this session for you to download the report. Sorry. Before we jump into the research on adaptive learning organization, let's look at what led to the emergence of adaptive learning organizations. Our L&D organizations, as we know, are very much influenced by the socioeconomic, political, and business changes in the environment. So some of the key events that have determined how we got to where we are today as a learning organization or an L&D community, let's look at a few eras. I've divided it into 3. Let's look at 1915 to 1950, which is pre-1950s. We saw the rise of industries and birth of corporate training.
I don't think we're seeing your slides, by the way. I just wanted to...
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Josh. Let's try this again.
Because they're so beautiful, we want people to see them.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh. Okay. All right, are they visible now?
We're seeing the your screen, the screen, but not the slides. I think you have to change maybe.
This should hopefully work. Works now?
Got it. We're there.
Thank you. Sorry about this, everybody.
Okay.
All right. So pre-1950s, this is when we saw the birth of corporate training, and the key influences of the time included people like Frederick Taylor, who introduced the idea of breaking tasks into elements and defining productivity metrics for each element. Frank and Lillian Gilbert, who introduced the motion study. And most importantly, Mary Parker Follett, who emphasized that people are the most valuable commodity present within any business. This is also the period where we saw the birth of executive training, with Sloan opening the first executive training institute. The focus for corporate learning during this period was to build skills required to do the job. And then as that evolved, we started to focus a little bit more on productivity. And since this was the era of industrial era, the lot of focus was on, in terms of training, a lot of focus was on processes and procedures. I am sorry, looks like we lost the slides again. Okay, from 1915 to 2000, which is the post-Cold War era, we saw emergence of the knowledge economy, globalization.
You're off again. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it just stops sharing.
Okay, well, you're there.
All right, so 1950 to 2000, we saw the emergence of knowledge economy, and Peter Drucker introduced the term knowledge worker and predicted privatization, decentralization. Before that, Howard Gardner had already introduced us to the theory of multiple intelligences. Peter Senge wrote his seminal book, The Fifth Discipline, and introduced the idea of a learning organization, which is an organization that is continually learning to see the whole together. As an L&D organization, we started to focus on commitment to lifelong learning. We were strongly influenced by Bloom's taxonomy and theory of multiple intelligences. And we started to look at operating models to cater to multiple geographies as organizations became much more global. From 2000 to 2019, which is until very recently, we've been in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. And one of the big changes that has happened during this time is the proliferation of mobile devices, massive digitization, and use of virtual reality, and also getting used to the fact that Google is our entry point into world's largest knowledge repository. Some of the influences of this time were Malcolm Gladwell in his Art of Decision Making and Thin Slicing, and how in a blink we can create a tipping point, and Jim Collins with his level 5 leadership and the concept of big, hairy, audacious goals, or C.K. Prahlad sensitizing us to the bottom of the pyramid, and of course Josh Bersin, who has been one of the key influencers looking at the L&D and broader HR market, looking at the trends both from the future of work perspective, but also from the learning technologies and HR technologies perspective, to create sensitivity around the emerging trends. Our focus around this time has been, as an L&D organization, we've been looking at retaining and growing talent, enriching learning technology ecosystem, leveraging MOOCs and free content, focusing a lot more on learner experience. And we would have happily continued on that path, slowly evolving. But then came, 2000 and the pandemic. the 2020 and the pandemic, and things change significantly, and we were forced to sort of rethink our current models. And that's where I think the notion of an adaptive learning organization started to become even more relevant, of how we can, as a learning organization, pivot even quicker to adapt to the changes, big transformational changes that are happening in the space of work. As we did the adaptive learning organization research, and it was we did this in partnership with Josh Bersin Academy, and as we took the first analysis to Josh, one of the key questions he asked was, well, what's the big deal about an adaptive learning organization? What's the business impact? So we went back and we analyzed the data, and we analyzed the organizations that we recognized as highly adaptive learning organizations. And interestingly, what we found is the data that you see on the screen. Adaptive learning organizations spend less and drive more value. They spend about 27% less. They are 59% more likely to experience business growth, 14% higher career opportunities, 15% higher rated senior leaders, and based on Glassdoor ratings, 13% higher employee experience. Oh, God.
PowerPoint is a little tricky sometimes.
Okay. Introducing the three characteristics of the adaptive learning organization. So how do we define an adaptive learning organization? Well, an adaptive learning organization is an organization that has ability to sense, which means it is a strategic partner to the business. It is committed to advancing business strategy. It is forward-looking. It is gathering data from multiple sources to create planning scenarios, and proactively preparing themselves to cater to an emerging future. It has a forward-looking lens, and is ultimately sourcing information that will impact talent and the capabilities needed currently and into the near future. It is an organization that is able to take all of that sensing data and make decisions very quickly. And it is an organization that is able to evolve and pivot and transform to deliver the increased value. As we look at each of these characteristics, we started to explore what were the practices of these adaptive learning organizations. And in the early part of our research, we identified 23 best practices. Some of these practices were still in the proof of concept stage, and others were more mature. So we leaned on the ones that were more mature and ended up with this set of 15 best practices that you see on the screen. In the report, you will see each of these practices described in more detail. For example, trend analysis is all about broadening access to trends outside the L&D community. So not just looking at inward-facing trends, but also looking at broader trends. What are the trends within our industry vertical that we are working in? What are the trends in terms of ways of working or future of work? What are the trends overall across learning? The adaptive learning organizations tend to have a much broader perspective of things, and they're able to use mechanisms to synthesize this data and convert it into meaningful, sense-making, actionable insights. The report has a lot more detail on each of these 15 best practices. So right now in this session, we'll just take an overview of some of these. We'll start with the first characteristic, which is sense. And as I shared earlier, sensing is about figuring out where we need to go. The ability to sense allows L&D to forecast future needs more quantitatively and in a way that makes it easier to build a business case and align with stakeholders. What we found out in our research was that sensing requires a whole new way of thinking and tools and practices that are forward-looking at the beginning and not backward. So traditionally, as an L&D organization, we followed models of learning measurement that are somewhat backward-looking. We do something and then we measure it to see whether it created the impact or not. sensing is changing that mindset a little bit to say forward looking. So what is it that the trends are saying? What is it that we want to achieve? And then bringing that insight into decisions that we make around our L&D strategy. As we interviewed and surveyed various organizations, and mostly the organizations that participated in this research are large, global, complex organizations. We found that comparatively within the organization set that we were working with, consistently the higher performers, so higher performing organizations had a higher adoption of each of these practices within each of the three characteristics. So as you can see on the screen, when we talk about using learning analytics or leveraging AI and curation or utilizing data sensing analytics, across the board, the high performing organizations have a much higher adoption of these practices versus the lower performing organization. Just as an example, and there are many other case studies in the report itself, this is one of the examples of how an organization, this is a large technology organization, and what they've done is they've created a data lake, which enables them to collate data from multiple sources, including internal LMS, external LMS, their learning record store, their customer relationship management system, their HR management system, their operational data, productivity data from tools such as Salesforce, financial systems, knowledge management systems, and even some external market data systems. So they pull data from all of these systems and they put it inside a data lake, and that allows them to then run analytics on that combined data and visualize insights and actions based on a combined consolidated view of that data. The next characteristic is decide. And decide, like I shared earlier, is an adaptive learning organization's ability to make highly relevant decisions quickly. And then once the decisions have been made, to be able to plan to action those decisions, but at the same time, be very mindful of the fact that the initial plans might change over time. So there is sort of a flexibility that is built in the planning mechanism that allows them to pivot very quickly and change in case there is a change required. Again, similar to what we saw in Sense, when we compared higher performing organizations with the lower performing organizations, and we looked at each of the practices, we found consistently that high performing organizations had a higher adoption of these practices versus the lower performing organizations. Just as another example, on an organization that we see is doing this process really well. This is a large oil and gas company, about 80,000 employees. And this uses an effective decision-making process. It's a federated, decentralized to federated learning organization. They have an executive vice president who sort of chairs this governance council, and all learning leaders are members of this council or decision-making body. And all key decisions and priorities are green-lighted through this body. So while they are federated and decentralized and operate quite independently of each other, they also come together to make key decisions. And one such example is their response to pandemic. So early March last year, they formulated a cross-business and cross-geo team to review all the face-to-face courses because they realized that instructor-led training will not work. By early April, they had already prioritized courses for virtualization using a comprehensive analysis tool that they sort of co-created with all the learning organizations together. Through April, they collaborated with a learning partner, which in this case was us, to define their approach for visualization. By early May, they had already developed the build plan and commissioned virtualization at scale. And June onwards, learners had already started consuming robust virtual learning experiences. And we work with so many other large global companies In many cases, we found that, by March, April, May, they were still figuring out whether this remote working or working from home is going to stay beyond summer, or will people come back to office by summer. But this organization, because of the strong sensing mechanisms that they had already studied the environment and concluded that it will not be practical and feasible for people to return to work that early. And they had already understood the implication of that. This is a oil and gas company, highly regulated, a lot of compliance training, a lot of mandatory training. So they took an early decision and were able to move through this really quickly, align their resources, even in a decentralized environment, and collate their resources to make this change happen. Evolve is the third characteristic of an adaptive learning organization, and this is really the ability to evolve and sustainably transform their existing ecosystem. We found that adaptive learning organizations build highly efficient, agile, and scalable operating models that anticipate and enable shifts in priorities and learning needs. Again, similar to what you saw for Sense and Decide, when we look at the various parameters, we find that higher performing organizations have a much higher adoption of these parameters versus the lower performing organizations. Just as another example of an evolved story, so this particular consumer products company looked at a problem where they were looking to reduce the time it took them to develop training on a new content area. And they took inspiration from the way their marketing and product teams work. And they co-created this design center where SMEs and learning designers, they all come together into a sort of a war room, right now, a virtual war room. And as the SMEs are thinking through the problem and how they will solve the problem, the learning designers are already working with them to create the content. And they found that this sort of co-creation, design thinking kind of a model has helped them reduce the development time by 90%. So this is an example of an evolved story where they did a little experiment in one area, found it successful, and were able to scale it and transform the way they develop new content. With that, I'm going to just share with you that this dialogue and this research on adaptive learning organizations is ongoing. We are continuing our dialogue here. We believe that the characteristics and the practices that we've identified are very relevant. However, the actions and best practices that organizations are using are going to continue to evolve. And as we continue the dialogue, we will uncover new best practices. So the dialogue continues. And if you are interested, we will be launching an assessment called the Adaptive Learning Organization Assessment that will help us assess how adaptive your learning organization is, but also develop a custom roadmap to help your learning organization be more adaptive. That assessment is going to be launched tomorrow. We also have a series of ongoing discussions planned. So the two that are coming up very soon is one on January 19th and another one on February 02. Most of these sessions take place around 9 a.m. Eastern, which is about 6 p.m. India time. So a little bit out of the work hours, but still quite feasible for people to attend. And then lastly, before I pass on the stage to Mike, to Josh, let me share the link for downloading the report. It's available at info.niit.com/ALO. With that, Josh, handing over to you.
Okay, thank you, Pooja. Let me see if I can have a little more luck with the slides for you guys.
The key, Josh, is to use your keyboard to move the slides versus the mouse.
Okay, great. All right, is that working?
Yep.
Is that working?
That's working.
Okay. Well, there's a couple things I want to talk about. and really want to try to get into a little bit about what's going on under the covers and share a little bit more of the research, and you can certainly read the report. But being adaptive, I think there's a little bit of feedback. So Pooja, maybe if you mute, I don't know if you're muted. Being adaptive may be the most important thing you do as a company right now. And if you think back about where we are in early 2021, and I go back to 2008. In 2008, we had a global financial meltdown. And for most of the 10 years or 12 years since then, we've been steadily growing the adoption of digital technologies, the internet, cloud, AI, and transforming our businesses as a result. And it was going down at a pretty good pace until the pandemic. And you can see it's almost a straight line, more or less. If you were to draw, a well-fitted line from here to here, it would be pretty straight. And then, of course, we had the pandemic this last year, which interrupted everything. But if you notice, this is the stock market, by the way, the line is going up at a steeper rate now. And the reason for that is what we just went through, and we're not done with it yet, is maybe the most massive, disruptive business transformation of many of our careers. We sent everybody home. Our customers couldn't interact with us face to face. Every product that we sold had to be delivered in a safe and a hygienic way. The things that people started to buy changed. Many of us had to work at home and weren't set up for that. Our family lives were disrupted. Our personal lives were disrupted. All of our entertainment went online. I mean, this is a big deal. And so, if you don't think learning is important, learning is about all we've been doing for the last year. And when we started this research with Pooja and Sailesh and the rest of the people at NIIT, and we hypothesized that adaptive learning would be the driver of growth and success, we didn't know we were about to get a pandemic. But now I would guarantee you that if you're not adaptive, you've fallen behind. And one of the ways to understand this is, let me give you two pieces of data. There's a research report that's coming out in the next couple of weeks from DDI. DDI is basically a leadership development company, but they've been doing the leadership survey of almost 10,000 companies for about 15 years. And I'm working with them as an analyst. And one of the things they do is they ask heads of HR, what are the 3 or 4 things that are top on your priorities for the coming year? Learning or upskilling or reskilling was one of the number 3 things in 84% of the companies. So 84% of the companies they surveyed, which are probably a little bit more advanced, believe learning is a top priority. That is the highest it's ever been, and it was the highest rated issue. Second thing is spending on learning. We didn't have a particularly good year in most economies. Most economies didn't grow at all, and many companies didn't grow, and many companies shrunk. But the learning and development spending, the industry, the technology, the content, the consulting grew at above average rate, 9%, which is a big number. It's a $240 to $250 billion market. So all of the evidence is proving that learning is critical, high priority to your business success. And, when we talk about adaptive learning, there's 2 ways of interpreting the statement. One is that the learning itself is adaptive. And the second is that the learning is letting the company be adaptive. And I think they both go together. If you are able to create an adaptive learning experience in your company itself will become more adaptive. I'll give you one specific example. I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but there's a very, very well-known technology company. You all know who this is. They're about 30 years old, 25 or 30 years old, and they have lost some of their largest customers in the last 2 years, very, very, very significant, to the degrees of billions of dollars. And I know the CHRO there, and I know the CLO, and I know a lot of the people there. And they said, we spent most of our last 2 decades focusing on production, on manufacturing, on quality, on scale, on industrial efficiency. We didn't pay attention to the way our customers were using data and AI and advanced analytics and ways and three-dimensional graphics and other things that happen to be in their market. And we lost it, and we are way behind. And that's an example of a company. They will recover. They're a very, very hardworking company, but they weren't learning fast enough. And I don't need to give you examples of companies in retail, manufacturing, financial services, healthcare. It's pretty much in every industry. Now, if you're in HR, if you're an HR leader or a CLO or a learning person, you know that this is a very, very complicated space. I mean, this is one of the most complex areas of HR. In fact, I think the learning industry as a whole is as big as and as complex as the rest of HR added up. I can't prove that, but I can certainly sort of explain why. Because we have to take every human, cultural, economic, and technology change, and we have to make it work in the most sort of central thing that human beings do, which is learn. Because if you think about, you know, all of the people in your company, which generally consist of 50, 60, 70% of the expense on payroll, so it's the most significant expense you have, they're all learning animals. I mean, we're all learning from the minute we're born. That's basically what we do our entire life as young people, and it doesn't stop when you get older. And so if the company doesn't facilitate and support and incent people to learn, we're not taking advantage of it. I mean, one of the other philosophical, you know, ways to think about it, that I think about it, is human beings are the only asset or that accelerate in their value over time. People get more valuable the more they learn. Everything else in your company depreciates. Everything else in your company wears out. People don't wear out. So when you do learning well, it pays off in many, many, many ways. Plus, it makes people more engaged. Now, what this chart is showing you is that the problem in the learning industry and the training industry is that we have to go through these massive paradigm shifts. And it takes a while, you know, it takes several years to really adapt to these new paradigm shifts. And so we tend to fall behind. I remember very well when I got into online learning in the late 1990s, people were trying to figure out how to take face-to-face classroom training and put it on the web. And, you know, we didn't have Zoom and we didn't have high bandwidth. We didn't even have video. And so we built page turning e-learning. And then, you know, companies said, well, wait a minute, we need to integrate the learning with the career and the talent practices. So let's build competency-based learning and career-based learning. And that went on for a while. And then, you know, Google and you know, and the iPhone and, you know, basically Steve Jobs killed the technology of Flash and put video, you know, right into the device. And we said, whoa, 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 we don't need all that stuff. Why don't we just turn on our cameras and record what people are doing, and we'll have sort of real-time micro-learning and come up with new paradigms of learning online, and YouTube and Khan's Academy and all of those things happened. And now we're in a world where that's gone crazy and there's pretty much content everywhere. And now we need to bring it back into context and fit it into the flow of work. And what I'm going to talk to you about really for the next few minutes is really how to do this. The Adaptive Learning Organization study will explain to you the actual principles of running a training department and a learning function, and to some degree an HR department around that. But you also have to reflect the fact that the industry itself is moving. And it is moving because of the time it takes to build tools. This is a sort of a simplified stack of all of the products and tools and technologies that you have to deal with when you develop a learning department. Now, you can be a small company with only a few people and you're dealing with the same issue. And that is at the bottom, we have to figure out who we're training. So we need a system that identifies the people by role, by title, by location, by language they speak. And that's usually a core payroll or HMS system. Then we have to figure out where we're going to put the data about learning. who signed up for one course, what did they finish, how long did it take them to finish it, have they finished a prerequisite. Those business rules and data elements have to be stored, and that's what learning management systems are designed to do. As I was showing you in the chart a few minutes ago, the learning management systems industry is about 22, 23 years old, and it was designed to handle that stuff at the bottom. Then we have the issue of actual content. What am I going to do? Am I going to read? Am I going to listen to a course? Am I going to go through a game? Am I going to talk to people? Am I going to do an exercise? Am I going to be a teacher? Am I going to work in a group? Am I going to work in a large group? Am I going to have one-on-one experience? Those are the more, imperfect parts of the model where you get to decide based on your experience and your company and your culture how you want people to learn. Self-study, clicking through courses works for some people, but it doesn't work for most people. And it certainly doesn't give you a high degree of application of learning. And so on top of that, we have these tools for finding and locating and blending together the learning experiences. Now, the reason I'm very confident that this is what happens is this is the way education works. If you kind of look at what happens in colleges and universities, they do all of this, but it's one teacher, it's one course, it's one semester, a very long period of time. And we don't have much time. And most people aren't going to spend more than an hour at a time dealing with learning. Maybe you're lucky if you can get them to go off site for a half a day or 2 days, but maybe that's only once or twice a year. So we've got to figure out ways to do this very, very effectively and very efficiently. Now, the other thing that's really been disruptive and from my standpoint, extremely exciting about this whole problem is that the way we work is changed very, very quickly. Back probably 6 years ago, when I was still at Deloitte, we were doing research on human capital trends, and we identified this emerging trend of companies to operate using the principles of Agile, where you wouldn't have a fixed job in a box. You had a job where you had a job description and job title, but you worked on different things. You worked on this for a while, then you worked on that for a while, and maybe there was a project leader on this and a project leader on that. Well, that has now become really mainstream, and to some degree, the pandemic accelerated that. Most of you did things during the last year that you weren't planning on doing, that weren't exactly in your job description, and virtually everybody in the company had to pick up and take on responsibilities to learn something or do something or work on a project that wasn't really planned several months earlier. In fact, in the United States, the research shows that 40% of Americans changed jobs, roles, or managers just this year. Talk about a disruptive situation. Most companies, would never, ever have predicted to have 40% of their workers or employees change roles. And the other thing that happened during the pandemic is we had an explosive growth in contingent part-time and gig work, doing things like delivery and logistics and drivers, healthcare, nurses, personal care, home health care. Those are new too. So we're in this world now where you are not a job and you're not locked into a job, and we can't define the job and put a box around it. So if we're going to teach people how to, perform well and adapt to change, we're going to have a learning approach that's much more adaptable to go along with the way people work. Now, one of the most common and popular paradigms for this is this idea of a skills-based learning system, where technology vendors, for the most part, have come up with crowdsourcing technology where the system will look at who you are and the job title you have, and it'll say, okay, here's 200 skills you need to know. There's literally 40,000 to 50,000 skills in these systems. And these skills are everything from, knowing how to use Microsoft Excel, being able to balance your checkbook, understand Java, doing statistics. I mean, they're everything from very tiny skills to very, very big, complex skills. And, what we've found in our work at building an academy, I've built an academy now for human resources, actually for a lot of you, is that isn't enough. Those are in a sense, the building blocks of your learning, but you need to put them together into business capabilities. And so what we studied, among other things in the ALO research, is how well companies define their business capabilities. An example of a business capability, if you have a sales organization, and I think most of you probably do, one of the things you have to do in a sales role is qualify leads. Is this person qualified to buy something from us or not? Now, that's actually a very complex skill. You have to be able to ask questions. You have to empathize. You have to know what the person's business is. You need to be able to pick up signals about whether this person is telling you the truth or not. In fact, I used to work for a guy many years ago, a sales executive, who told me, one of the things we'll teach you about sales, all customers lie all the time. They don't tell you the truth because they don't want you to know what's really going on. Anyway, this what I'm getting at is this one little thing is much more complex than you might imagine. You can take a 1-hour course on how to qualify a lead, go through the course, pass the test, and still not know how to do it. And this goes on and on and on and on. And so when you really think about what makes people successful in your company, in different domains of your company, these complex capabilities come up. And what we're really doing today, and I mean 2021, this is new, is we're learning how to build capability models that can drive you to the right skills and experiences and mentoring and job assignments and developmental assignments that will help you build these capabilities. Because as most of you know that have thought about this, becoming deeply expert in any topic takes time. It takes years. It takes multiple experiences. You're going to make mistakes. And that's what we need to do in learning. And that's why the ALO models are so important. Now, the other part of the learning industry that's extremely complex but interesting and important is the technology and the data. And this is one of the things that NIIT is very, very good at, by the way. And we've done a lot of stuff with NIIT, and I couldn't recommend them more. But the products or the technologies that you buy, going back to that picture that showed all the little boxes, tend to fall into categories. There's pretty much training systems where you sign up, take a course, and then you get a completion certificate. There's job transition systems that do onboarding and take you from this role to this role, or this position to this position, or this level of capability to that. There are academies that are sort of complete integrated experiences. There are marketplaces for talent where people say, I'm ready for a new assignment. I'm kind of tired of this job. I want to learn something new. What should I do next? What is the job assignment that would be most appropriate for me, that would help me with my career? Is there one of those available in the company? If there is, how do I apply for it? And what do I need to do to be qualified for it? And then there's the whole issue of a credential. How do I know as a company, or my boss or the executives, that I do know a lot of things? I had a very interesting conversation earlier today with the chief transformation officer for one of the largest telecommunications companies in Australia. And they have implemented a complete agile operating model. And one of the things we talked a lot about was that in an agile operating model, which is where most companies are going, the only way you really can determine who to promote or who to pay more money is through their capabilities. And the only way to measure their capabilities is through their experiences and their successes and their reputation. You can't give them a test. It doesn't necessarily tell you what they're really capable to do. So this idea of how you're going to credentialize people and how you're going to evaluate them is really important. It gets into how you decide to pay them, who gets promoted, who gets assigned to what project, and so forth. So that all that salmon-colored stuff is really important. And what I'm showing you underneath that is they each have different sources of data. And what we do in the learning function, and this is why people in L&D have to be such good designers, is we kind of build things on top of that so that when you're sitting around using tools like the one we're using today, you can find the content that you need in a relatively short amount of time, and you're not browsing around searching, scrolling through pages, because most people won't do that. Frankly, they'll just go away and they'll just stop. And one of the things that's happened that comes out of the ALO research is it's forced us to reskill ourselves. One of the sort of categories of research that comes out of the ALO study is the need to upskill and continuously reskill yourself as an HR person, as an L&D person, as a business person involved in this domain. If you go back, for example, 15 or 20 years when I first got into it and I wrote my first book on learning measurement, I mean, it was the ADDIE model. It was, traditional instructional design, the Kirkpatrick model of measurement. It was pretty much an extension of instructor-led learning applied to something that happened on the internet. Now we're talking about people doing experience design, taxonomies, looking at very advanced media. I mean, every advanced media asset makes it into learning quickly. TikTok, for example. I mean, I've joked about this, but I'm not kidding. TikTok is a learning paradigm, and I think we need to look at why people like TikTok and why they're so consumed with it when we think about learning design, using agile development methodologies, understanding marketing and positioning and customer segmentation. These are very sophisticated capabilities that we have to adapt. And the job roles in L&D have changed also. I've tried to draw just some sample sort of, paths of how we went from, the jobs on the left, the job titles on the left to the job titles on the right. I mean, I don't think, in 1998, if we said we're looking for a learning experience designer, nobody would have known what the heck we're talking about. In fact, they wouldn't even if they would have laughed us out of the room. Now, it's kind of like one of the hottest jobs out there. How do you build an experience that compels people to learn and delivers a lot of great capabilities and doesn't take so much time that people can't get their way through it? Now, getting back to this idea of the capabilities and Capability Academy, let me just take a couple minutes on that. Among the things we studied in the ALO study, we asked companies how broadly they sort of design their learning experiences in the academy model. Now, an academy, let me just give you sort of a context. The word academy came to me about 2.5, 3 years ago when I was building a learning program basically for HR. And I realized that HR itself is really a craft. You learn it by doing it. You can go to classes and you can learn from experts, but you don't really learn how to do all the things in HR until you do them. And so we needed an academy-like paradigm, like a police academy. And, the reason I think of a police academy is not that I know a lot about it, but, the reason there's a police academy is because every year you go back there and you learn new things about how to be better on the job as a policeman. And you learn from other policemen, not just from teachers. And you talk about things that have changed in the environment and new tools and things going on in cities. Well, we have to do the same thing. Great learning takes place in multiple modes. We have the need for what I call learning in the flow of work or micro-learning. We need major programs. There's, at least 40% of the time, people need to stop what they're doing and focus on something new in order to really force themselves to re-engage their mind and learn something new. We need communities and groups of collaboration to learn. That's clearly why we have classrooms and lots of classroom discussions and the Socratic method. And then we need on-the-job learning where people take time to ask questions, to answer questions, to question why we're making mistakes, to talk about errors, and continuously grow. And the idea of an academy is that you do all 4 of these things together. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we don't have too much time tonight, but what we can do with NIIT's help, or you can read about in the report, is you can reframe your L&D department or your L&D library or whatever you may call it into this idea of academies focused on particular strategic capabilities, and you'll be able to do all of these things in an integrated way. And by the way, one of the keys to success of this type of approach is having a business sponsor. If you're doing an academy on cybersecurity, the CIO should sponsor it. If you're doing an academy on sales, the chief sales officer should sponsor it. If it's an academy on finance and accounting, the CFO should sponsor it. They should be intimately involved, because what's going to happen is there's going to be different use cases. People are going to use the content whenever they want. They're going to use the content based on skills and capabilities that you've developed for them through an assessment or some kind of a model. And we can show you an example of the one we use. They're going to take learning because they have to, because their boss said, you know what? You're not going to get on that machine until you've taken the course on how to fix it or how to use it correctly, or you're not going to take that role until you've been through these courses. There's compliance-based learning. And then there's this whole new fascinating world of nudged learning, where the system or an AI tool or something in the environment encourages you to learn or read or listen to something, because it knows that people in your job at this stage are going to be better off if they do these things. And that's really what we're trying to do with this Capability Academy, is move from all of these paradigms in the past into a more integrated approach. Now, when I started thinking about this, and we've talked to a lot of companies about it, one of the things that happened is companies said, oh, well, let's just build a whole bunch of these capability academies. We'll take all the training programs we have, we'll build a capability academy in every one. That's not the right answer. If you really look at the capability and learning problems you have in your company, some of them are strategic, proprietary, critical to your company's success. Some of them are operational, that if people don't know how to do these things well, you'll have errors or cost problems. And some of them are really what I would call hygiene. You need to know these things, but we don't need to push people to be world experts on them, because they're not core to our business. And I'm not going to tell you what those things are, but one of the ways to work that out is we have a 2x2 that has on the horizontal operational versus strategic, and on the vertical off the shelf versus proprietary. Everybody has proprietary skills, proprietary methods, proprietary inventions and tools, and proprietary methodologies that are unique to you. And those proprietary areas that are used in strategic ways are where you build the capability academies. And you may find that, this year we need a capability academy on quality, or on supply chain, or on customer service, or on, something else. And 3 or 4 years from now, we've developed a sort of a core capability and a whole bunch of infrastructure in the company. We don't need an academy in that anymore. We can move our academy efforts somewhere else. And so this is a very powerful way of reallocating your L&D investments and your management resources and attention toward the most strategic issues. A couple more quick things and then I'll wrap up. Now, going back to the idea of being adaptive, when you're a small company or a small training department, you're infinitely adaptable, because anytime somebody asks you for something, you just stop what you're doing and you just do it. The problem is you run into trouble with scale, because you get a lot of those requests and then you say, all right, well, let's build some standard stuff. Let's buy some technology. Let's tell people, oh, well, no, I'm not doing that, because you can just take this course. It's already here. And the bigger the company gets, the more rigid, in a sense, the learning becomes. Because what happens in most companies is the learning department in the core part of the company, the central or the corporate function, can't keep up. So we have a learning department in this group, we have a learning department in that group, we have a person doing learning over here, we've got a guy doing learning over there, we outsource this over here, and the next thing you know, you've got this smattering of activity going on that's not very well integrated. In fact, the world's largest retailer, whose name will go unmentioned, told me 2 weeks ago that they had 80 learning management systems. Now, it took them 3 years to clean that up, and I don't know if NIIT helped them, I think they did. And they cleaned it all up, and now they have a very integrated approach, but it took a while for them to come into an agreement on how this was going to be integrated and what responsibilities were where. And so I would sort of encourage you, the bigger your company is, the more important it is to think about the principles of the ALO, because you're going to need them even more. It's easy for a small learning organization to sort of pivot. It is not easy for a big one to do that. Now, this is a little bit hard to read, but let me just run through it really quick. In the three areas that Pooja mentioned of sense, decide, and evolve, we had about, I don't know, 50 or 60 practices that we evaluated. And what these bars are showing you is the relative adoption of the practice by the high-performing companies in light blue versus the low-performing companies in black. And you can see in many cases, the low-performing companies had no adoption of these practices at all. The answer was 0. We don't do this at all. But in every single case, I don't think there's any where the black bars are higher than the blue. Nope, there's one where they're close. But in every single case, the high-performing companies were 30 to 40 to 50% higher in their adoption of these practices. So we can pretty much predict and guarantee to you that if you look through these practices and work on them, whichever ones turn out to be the most important to you, and we'll help you figure that out, you will drive a higher performance learning organization. And, you know, this isn't about being a high performance learning organization. This is about being a high performance organization. All of the things in here on identifying what problems to work on, making strong, innovative decisions on what types of learning interactions and systems and tools to create, and integrating learning into the flow of work, using data in an effective way, and coming up with great experiences, they are all important right now. When 84% of companies think reskilling is one of their top priorities, you know, I would say, you know, all those thousands of CHROs, I wish I could get them to read this. These are things that will really, really help you do that. So let me just wrap up with just a couple of thoughts, and then I'll give you the slide to the report again. Adaptability is maybe one of the greatest things, business inventions you could create. And we in L&D and HR, in many ways, are the keepers of adaptability. When we do our jobs well, the company becomes more adaptable. Not only are we more adaptable, but the company itself becomes more adaptable. New ideas can be developed more quickly, new technologies and solutions. We can respond to customers faster. We can respond to market changes faster. We can respond to things like the pandemic faster. And by the way, this is not the last time we're going to have an business interruption like that. So this is research that's valuable from an HR standpoint, from an L&D standpoint, and also from the standpoint of a CEO. So let me stop there. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but
we have just a couple of minutes, Josh, so maybe we can take one or two questions. The one that I can see is about this question around measuring proficiency of learners. And the question is, at what level should it be measured, at the capability level or skill level?
Well, I think both are useful. The skill level will be useful in terms of, you know, helping people determine what kind of content to look for and when to skip over something because they don't need it. But it won't really help you so much with your business. I think business capabilities are what's going to be the information that will tell you, you know, who to pay more money, who's at risk of leaving, who should be promoted, who should be a mentor. And so, you know, I would keep it at that level. You know, there's companies like IBM that have gone crazy with badging. You get a skills badge when you take this course and you get skills. You know, I mean, I love IBM, but I don't think that's as useful as you think. Collecting badges doesn't make you a better worker. So I would spend some serious time on the capabilities. And by the way, building a strong capability model of your own, you know, takes a cohort of stakeholders in the company. We've talked to a lot of companies that have done this over many, many years, and it's a strategic task that you should go through at least probably once a year and just sort of relook at your strategic capabilities and see how they've kept up and whether there's new ones you need to address.
Thank you so much, Josh. And I think with that, our time for this session is up. Thank you so much for joining us. And back to you, Dilip.
Thank you, Josh and Pooja, for an immensely insightful session in the field of adaptive learning to accelerate performance. Thank you so much, both of you.